Throughout the sacred narrative of the Bible, one physical object appears again and again. It stands at the crossroads of pivotal moments, in times of intimate worship, solemn covenant, and intense spiritual conflict. That object is the altar. For many of us today, the word itself can feel distant, perhaps even primitive or unfamiliar. In our modern world of clean sanctuaries and abstract concepts of faith, the raw, earthy image of a stone altar can seem like a relic from a forgotten time. But in the ancient world, altars were saturated with profound spiritual meaning. They were far more than just religious furniture or ceremonial props. An altar was a tangible intersection between the divine and the human. It was a place where people declared their ultimate allegiance, where they offered sacrifices to atone for sin or express gratitude, and where they formally acknowledged a spiritual authority over their lives. It was a point on the map where heaven and earth met. In the earliest chapters of Scripture, we see the first altars built by those who worshipped the one true God of creation. These were not elaborate temples, but simple, heartfelt structures of earth and stone. After the flood, as the waters receded from a world washed clean, the first recorded act of Noah was to build an altar to the Lord. Upon it, he offered sacrifices of thanksgiving, an aroma that the Scripture says was pleasing to God, leading to a covenant promise that he would never again destroy the earth by water. This altar marked a new beginning for all humanity. Later, the patriarch Abraham, the father of faith, built altars at several key moments in his journey with God. His life was a pilgrimage, and his altars were the signposts of his faith along the way. Each altar marked a specific, personal encounter, a moment when God revealed himself and established his covenant promises. At Shechem, Abraham built his first altar in the Promised Land, a claim of faith in a territory that was not yet his. At Bethel, he built another, calling on the name of the Lord. These were not just piles of rocks, they were declarations of trust in the unseen God. The legacy continued. Isaac, the son of promise, also built altars. At Beersheba, after God appeared to him and reaffirmed the covenant made with his father, Isaac built an altar, dug a well, and pitched his tent. The altar was central to establishing his home and his life in the presence of God. And Jacob, Abraham's grandson, built altars. After his transformative dream of a ladder to heaven, he anointed a stone pillar and called the place Bethel, the house of God. Years later, God would call him back to that very spot to build an altar, solidifying his identity and his relationship with the God of his fathers. For the patriarchs, these structures became powerful physical reminders of God's faithfulness. They were memorials of past encounters and anchors of hope for future promises. But altars were not unique to the worship of the God of Israel. The impulse to create a sacred space for sacrifice and communion seems to be woven into the fabric of human spirituality. Throughout the ancient world, nearly every culture built altars. From the mighty empires of Mesopotamia and Egypt to the tribal peoples of Canaan, altars were a universal feature of religious life. The pagan religions that surrounded Israel constructed elaborate altars for their pantheon of gods. Canaanite worship, for example, included altars dedicated to the storm god Baal and the fertility goddess Asherah. These were often built on high places, prominent hills or mountains, and were accompanied by sacred stones and wooden poles. These altars were used for sacrifices, rituals, and ceremonies deeply connected to a worldview of false worship, often involving depraved and cruel practices. They represented a spiritual system in direct opposition to the God of Israel. Because of this fundamental spiritual conflict, when Israel prepared to enter the land of Canaan, God gave them a command that may sound severe to modern ears. It was a command of spiritual purification. They were instructed to completely destroy the pagan altars. The book of Deuteronomy records the command with chilling clarity. Israel was to tear down their altars, smash their sacred stones, cut down their Asherah poles, and burn the carved images of their gods in the fire. This was not an act of cultural vandalism. It was an act of spiritual warfare. Why such drastic, uncompromising action? Because altars represented spiritual authority and allegiance. To whom you build an altar is to whom you belong. Leaving those pagan altars standing would mean leaving behind powerful, visible symbols of allegiance to false gods. It would be a constant source of temptation, a spiritual cancer left to grow in the heart of the nation. And the tragic history of Israel shows that whenever they failed to fully obey this command, whenever they compromised and allowed these altars to remain, the people were inevitably drawn back into the darkness of idolatry. One of the most powerful and dramatic moments involving an altar occurs in the story of the prophet Elijah. It is a story of national crisis and divine confrontation. In the book of 1 Kings, we find Elijah confronting the 450 prophets of Baal on the summit of Mount Carmel. The people of Israel had been divided, limping between two different opinions, attempting to worship both the Lord and the pagan deity Baal. Their spiritual identity was fractured. So Elijah proposed a definitive test to reveal the one true God. 2 altars would be prepared, each with a sacrifice, one altar for Baal and one for the Lord. The God who answered by fire, he would be God. For hours, the prophets of Baal cried out, danced, and even cut themselves in a desperate frenzy, pleading for their God to answer with fire. But there was no voice. No one answered. No one paid attention. Then Elijah took his turn. His first action was profoundly symbolic. He rebuilt the altar of the Lord that had been broken down, using 12 stones to represent the 12 tribes of Israel. He was restoring the nation's true foundation of worship. He placed the sacrifice on the altar, drenched it with water 3 times, and then he prayed a simple, powerful prayer. And fire fell from heaven, consuming not just the offering, but the wood, the stones, the dust, and even the water in the trench. That singular moment on Mount Carmel demonstrated a powerful, eternal truth. Altars reveal where our allegiance truly lies. There is no middle ground. But as the story of Scripture unfolds, the New Testament brings a profound and beautiful shift in how believers understand worship and the very concept of an altar. Jesus himself, in his conversation with the woman at the well, taught that a time was coming when true worship would not be limited to specific mountains or temples. Instead, true worshipers would worship the Father in spirit and in truth. The location becomes secondary to the condition of the heart. With the coming of Christ, the focus moves from physical altars of stone and earth to the transformed lives of believers. The Apostle Paul, in his letter to the Romans, makes this radical connection clear. He urges believers to present their bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God, which he calls their true and proper worship. In other words, the altar of the Christian life is no longer a place we go to, but a life we live. It becomes the heart, fully surrendered to God. Our very bodies become the temple, and our lives become the offering. Yet the ancient principle behind the altars of the Old Testament still teaches us an urgent and important lesson for today. Where we direct our devotion, our energy, and our love still matters profoundly. What we place at the center of our lives, the thing to which we sacrifice our time, our resources, and our affection, that thing is our altar. Every person, whether they realize it or not, builds an altar in their heart. We are created to worship, and something will always occupy that central place. For some, it is the altar of career, sacrificing family and health for the next promotion. For others, it is the altar of wealth, where every decision is weighed against its financial return. For many, it is the altar of personal ambition, reputation, comfort, or pleasure. These are the modern high places, the idols to which we give our ultimate allegiance. But the call of Christ is an invitation to tear down these other altars. It is a call to place God, and God alone, at the absolute center of our existence. It is a call to surrender our lives fully to Him, to make His glory our highest ambition, and His will our greatest desire. When that surrender happens, worship is no longer an event limited to a specific time or location. It becomes the very orientation of our entire life. Our work becomes worship. Our relationships become worship. Our rest becomes worship. Because the true altar, the one that has mattered since the beginning and matters now more than ever, is the sacred space where the human heart meets and surrenders to the living presence of God. As we conclude our time together, let us carry the essence of this message in our hearts. The altars we build in our lives, whether through prayer, worship, or acts of service, are sacred spaces where we meet God. They are testaments to our faith, memorials of His faithfulness, and launching pads for His purpose in our lives. May you be inspired to build your own altars, to create intentional moments of encounter with the divine. Let these moments not be fleeting, but foundational, shaping your days and guiding your steps. In every sunrise and every quiet reflection, remember that He is near. Thank you for watching. If this message spoke to your heart or opened your eyes, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more truth-filled content. Together, we can be a voice for the voiceless and a light in the darkness. We are a community dedicated to spreading His word and being a force for good in this broken world. Your support helps us continue this mission. God bless you, and we'll see you in the next video.